The morning light filtered through my kitchen window as I rolled out the pumpkin pie dough, my hands moving with the practiced ease of 50 years of Thanksgiving preparations. At 72, I still felt the same flutter of excitement I'd had as a young mother, anticipating the warmth of family gathered around our old mahogany dining table. The house smelled of cinnamon and nutmeg, sage and butter, the sense of tradition, of love made tangible. I carefully lifted an extra chair from the closet, placing it beside the long table that had hosted countless family celebrations. My fingers lingered on its worn wooden back as I whispered to the empty room. Even if you're busy, honey, Mom will always keep your place. This was our family's sacred day, the day when Daniel would bring his stories from the law firm, when Rachel might soften enough to let me help with little Emma, when Claire would call from California with updates about her new life. I'd spent weeks planning the menu, polishing the silverware that had been my mother's, and choosing the perfect centerpiece of autumn leaves and gourds from my garden. My phone buzzed against the counter. A text from Rachel, my daughter-in-law. The words hit me like ice water. Don't come today. There's no room at our table anymore. We need space for people who matter. I read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. My hands trembled as the phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the kitchen tiles. The sound echoed through the suddenly cold house like a gunshot. Before I could process what I'd read, I heard my son's voice drifting from their kitchen next door. He must have put me on speakerphone without realizing I could hear through the thin walls of our connected townhouses. Mom just makes everyone uncomfortable, Daniel's voice carried clearly through the morning air. It's better if she stays home alone. Trust me, the dinner will be much more pleasant without her there. I stood frozen in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of 50 years of Thanksgiving traditions. The extra chair I just placed seemed to mock me now, a symbol of my naive hope that family still meant something. On one side was my warm, welcoming kitchen, filled with the promise of shared love. On the other was the devastating realization that I was no longer welcome in my own son's life. The contrast was so stark, it took my breath away. Here I was, in the space where I'd taught my children to cook, where I'd bandaged their scraped knees and listened to their dreams, and just 30 feet away, that same child was erasing me from his life, as casually as clearing a place setting. I reached for the chair I'd just positioned so hopefully, pulling it close against my trembling body. My voice came out as barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a woman who had finally heard enough. If you won't invite me, I said to the empty room, my voice growing stronger with each word, then I'll choose my own seat. Something shifted in that moment. The fear and hurt began to crystallize into something harder, more purposeful. If my family didn't want me at their table, perhaps it was time to build my own. 25 years ago, I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold the farm that had been in my family for 3 generations, the rolling green acres where I'd planned to grow old with my husband Robert, where our children had learned to ride horses and catch fireflies on summer evenings. The buyer's check for $180,000 felt like blood money in my hands, but Daniel needed it for law school. Mom, I'll pay you back, he'd promised, his young face earnest and determined. Once I'm established, you'll never have to worry about money again. I believed him. How could I not? This was the boy I'd rocked through countless fevers, the teenager who'd brought me dandelions and called them roses, The young man who'd cried in my arms when his father died of a sudden heart attack during Daniel's junior year of college. After Robert's funeral, it was just us against the world. I worked double shifts at the university library, my fingers growing rough from handling thousands of books, my back aching from long hours hunched over cataloging systems. Every penny I didn't spend on basic necessities went into Daniel's education fund. Ramen noodles became my dinner staple. I learned to darn socks and patch elbows because new clothes weren't in the budget. When Daniel graduated summa cum laude and landed his position at Morrison, Klein and Associates, I felt like the richest woman in Boston. At his graduation party, he stood before our small gathering of neighbors and college friends, raising a glass of champagne I couldn't afford, but had bought anyway. To my mother, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion, who sacrificed everything so I could have everything. I promise you, Mom, your struggles end today. Those words sustained me through the lonely years that followed. When Daniel married Rachel 3 years later, I welcomed her with open arms, hoping for the daughter I'd never had. When their daughter Emma was born, I felt my heart expand in ways I didn't know were possible. Finally, I thought, we were a real family again. I threw myself into being the perfect mother-in-law and grandmother. I babysat Emma every weekend, taught her to bake cookies and read stories in funny voices. I helped Rachel with household chores without being asked, always careful to respect their space while making myself useful. When they bought their first house, the beautiful colonial next to my modest townhouse, I thought it was a sign that we'd always be close. For years, this arrangement worked beautifully. Sunday dinners at my table, Christmas mornings with Emma tearing through presents while I documented every moment with my old camera. Summer barbecues, where Daniel would flip burgers and tell stories about his cases, while Rachel and I prepared side dishes together. I should have seen the signs when the Sunday dinners moved to their house, and I became the guest instead of the hostess. I should have worried when Rachel started making subtle comments about my outdated cooking methods and old-fashioned ideas about child rearing. I should have questioned why Daniel stopped asking for my advice and started treating my opinions like outdated relics. But I was so grateful to have family nearby, so desperate to maintain the connection, that I convinced myself these changes were natural. Families evolve, I told myself. Children grow up and take charge. My role was to adapt, to be grateful for whatever place they made for me in their lives. The truth was, I'd been slowly disappearing from my own family for years, and I'd been too afraid of losing them completely to fight for my place at their table. The first crack in our family foundation appeared 6 months ago, and like most fractures, it started small. Rachel had begun sending me birthday and Christmas gifts that felt more like afterthoughts than expressions of love. Last Christmas, she'd given me a clearance scarf still bearing the $4.99 sticker, while Daniel received a $300 watch and Emma got the latest iPad. When I mentioned feeling hurt to Daniel, he'd waved away my concerns. Mom, it's the thought that counts. Rachel's busy with her real estate career now, but it wasn't just the gifts. During family dinners, whenever I'd share memories of Daniel's childhood or stories from my years at the university library, Rachel would check her phone conspicuously, or Daniel would steer the conversation elsewhere. Nobody wants to hear about the old days, Mom, he'd say with a forced laugh. Our guests prefer to talk about current events. current events that apparently didn't include my life or experiences. I found myself relegated to the far end of their dining table during dinner parties, seated with the children or elderly relatives, while the interesting adults clustered around Rachel and Daniel. When I tried to contribute to conversations about literature, my area of expertise after 30 years as a university librarian, Rachel would interrupt with comments like, "That's nice, Helen, but we're talking about contemporary issues now." The exclusion became more systematic. When Emma needed help with her homework, Rachel would say, "Grandma's methods are too old fashioned. We use modern techniques now." When I offered to babysit during their date nights, Rachel would decline, claiming they preferred professional sitters who were up to date on child safety protocols. My credit card, the supplementary card on Daniel's account that I used for groceries and emergencies, was suddenly declined at the supermarket one Tuesday afternoon. The cashier's pitying look as she cut up the card in front of a line of impatient customers burned hotter than the Massachusetts winter wind. "There must be some mistake," I'd stammered. But when I called Daniel, he was matter of fact. "We're streamlining our finances, Mom. Rachel thinks it's better if you handle your own expenses now." No discussion, no warning. Just another piece of my place in their lives quietly erased. The breaking point came during Emma's 8th birthday party last month. I'd spent weeks knitting her a sweater in her favorite purple color, working late into the night despite my arthritis. When I arrived with my gift wrapped in tissue paper I'd saved from the previous Christmas, Rachel intercepted me at the door. "Helen, could you wait in the kitchen while we take family photos? You look, well, you know how important these pictures are for our Christmas cards." I stood in their gleaming kitchen, listening to laughter and camera clicks from the living room, holding my homemade gift like a shameful secret. Through the doorway, I watched my son capture family memories that didn't include the woman who'd given up everything to make his success possible. When I finally presented Emma with her sweater, she smiled politely and set it aside, far more interested in the expensive electronics and designer clothes piled around her. Later, I found it stuffed in a donation bag in their garage. That night, I lay awake wondering when I'd become a burden instead of a blessing, an embarrassment instead of a cherished family member. The woman who'd once been the center of her family's universe was now orbiting at the very edges, tolerated but not wanted, included but not valued. I should have recognized it then. This wasn't neglect born of busyness or oversight. This was a deliberate campaign to erase me from their lives, one small cruelty at a time. The systematic exclusion accelerated after Emma's birthday party, as if Rachel had decided subtle hints weren't working fast enough. What had been passive-aggressive slights became active hostility, and Daniel's complicity shifted from willful blindness to active participation. During Thanksgiving preparations, I'd offered to bring my famous stuffing, the recipe that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family. Rachel's response was swift and cutting. "We're going gourmet this year, Helen. Store-bought is fine for what you can manage." When I insisted on contributing something homemade, she reluctantly agreed to let me bring dinner rolls. I spent an entire day perfecting the recipe, kneading the dough with hands that ached from arthritis, letting it rise twice to achieve the perfect texture my mother had taught me decades ago. I arrived early to help with preparations, carrying my rolls in the same wicker basket I'd used for 20 years of family gatherings. Rachel took one look at my offering and wrinkled her nose. These look a bit dense, don't they? And I can smell the yeast from here. Without another word, she scraped my rolls directly into the garbage disposal, basket and all. I picked up some from the bakery section at Whole Foods. Much more reliable. The sound of my mother's recipe disappearing down the drain felt like watching a piece of my heritage die. But Daniel, who had devoured those same rolls as a child and begged me to make them for every special occasion, said nothing. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. The guest list for their dinner party had grown to include Rachel's colleagues, Daniel's law partners, and several neighbors. But somehow there was no longer room at the table for me. Instead, I was directed to eat in the kitchen, where it's quieter and more comfortable for you, Helen. Through the doorway, I could hear toasts and laughter, conversations about career successes and vacation plans, the life of a family that had apparently outgrown the need for its matriarch. When I tried to join the group for coffee and dessert, Rachel intercepted me with a hand on my arm. Actually, Helen, Emma has school tomorrow, and you know how cranky she gets when she stays up too late. Maybe it's better if you head home now. It was barely 7 o'clock. The financial manipulation became more brazen. Bills for services I'd never requested started arriving at my house. Landscaping for their yard, groceries for their pantry, even Rachel's monthly hair appointments at an upscale salon. When I questioned these charges, Daniel's response was chilling in its casualness. Mom, you're living in our neighborhood, benefiting from property value increases we've driven up. It's only fair you contribute to maintenance costs. The neighborhood I'd lived in for 15 years before they'd moved next door. The modest townhouse I'd bought with Robert's life insurance money, the only asset I had left after sacrificing everything for Daniel's education. But the cruelest blow came when I developed a severe case of pneumonia in February. For 3 weeks, I lay in my bed, too weak to cook for myself, surviving on crackers and tea because I was too proud to ask for help and too sick to shop for proper food. Not once did Daniel or Rachel check on me. Not once did they offer assistance or even ask if I needed anything. When I finally recovered enough to venture outside, Mrs. Patterson from across the street expressed her concern. Helen, we were so worried about you. We kept expecting to see Daniel or Rachel coming by to help, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air like an accusation. Even the neighbors had noticed my family's abandonment. That's when I realized this wasn't just neglect or the natural evolution of family dynamics. This was deliberate isolation, a methodical campaign to push me out of their lives entirely. They were waiting for me to disappear quietly, to fade away without causing inconvenience or embarrassment. They wanted me gone, but they wanted it to be my choice so they could maintain their image as loving family members who'd done everything they could for a difficult, elderly relative. The final destruction of my illusions came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 month before that devastating Thanksgiving text. I was in my garden, deadheading the last of my autumn chrysanthemums, when I heard voices carrying clearly through Daniel and Rachel's open kitchen window. They must have forgotten how sound travels between our connected townhouses. The financial advisor says we need to move faster. Rachel's voice was crisp with calculation. Her retirement account has almost $200,000 in it, plus the equity in this house. If we wait much longer, she might get suspicious. Or, worse, decide to blow it all on some senior living community. The power of attorney papers are already signed, Daniel replied, and I could hear papers rustling. She trusts me completely. She'll never question it. My pruning shears slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the brick border of my flower bed. Power of attorney. I had never signed any such documents. Good, Rachel continued, because frankly, I'm tired of pretending to care about her feelings. Did you see how she looked at me when I threw out those pathetic dinner rolls, like I'd committed some crime against her precious family traditions? Daniel's laugh was cold, unfamiliar. She still thinks she's the matriarch of this family. Someone needs to explain to her that she's just excess baggage now. We've gotten everything useful out of her. The sooner we get her into Sunset Manor, the better. My real estate contacts say elderly residents there typically don't last more than 2 years. Natural causes, of course. And then we'll finally have the privacy and space we need to live our real lives. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall of my house, my heart hammering so hard I was certain they'd hear it. These were my children. Well, my child and the woman he'd chosen over his own mother. They were discussing my life, my death, my assets, as if I were already gone. What about Claire? Daniel asked, referring to my daughter in California. She's 3,000 miles away and barely calls. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be a done deal. Besides, she's always been the emotional one. She'll probably thank us for taking care of the difficult decisions. I slumped against the wall, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Claire, my sweet youngest daughter who called every Sunday, who sent care packages and worried about me being lonely. They were planning to cut her out, too, to present her with a fait accompli that would rob her of any chance to say goodbye to her mother with dignity. The best part, Rachel continued, her voice bright with cruel satisfaction, is that everyone will see us as the devoted family members who sacrifice to care for an aging parent. We'll get sympathy, not scrutiny. And if she makes any trouble about the arrangements, Daniel added, we'd just remind everyone about her little episodes of confusion. Who's going to believe a woman who calls people at 3 in the morning and forgets she did it? The phone calls, the recording they'd played for me, my own voice sounding lost and disoriented. I'd been so ashamed, so confused about when I might have made such calls. But now I understood. Those calls had been fabricated, recorded during one of my illness-induced delirium episodes when I'd had pneumonia and a high fever. They'd been building a case against my mental competency for months. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The excluded family photos, the financial manipulation, the social isolation. It had all been designed to paint a picture of a confused, burdensome, elderly woman whose family was reluctantly dealing with her decline. They were creating a narrative that would justify anything they did to me. I crawled rather than walked back to my kitchen door, my vision blurred with tears of rage and betrayal. Once inside, I sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Daniel with homework for 12 years, where I'd listened to his dreams and fears, where I'd comforted him after his father's death. The contrast between those memories and what I'd just heard was so stark, it literally took my breath away. The child I'd sacrificed everything for, the man I'd believed loved me despite his recent coldness, had been plotting to steal not just my money, but my autonomy, my dignity, my very life. But as I sat there in my small, humble kitchen, surrounded by the modest furnishings I'd accumulated over decades of careful saving. I felt something crystallize inside me. The hurt was transforming into something much more dangerous: clarity. They thought I was weak, confused, easily manipulated. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began making lists. Not the grocery lists or holiday planning lists I usually wrote, but something far more important. I was cataloging 25 years of financial records, gifts, sacrifices, and lies. By dawn, I had filled 6 pages with documentation. The $180,000 from my family farm that had funded Daniel's law school. The countless hours of free babysitting and housework. The gifts and loans that had never been repaid. And most importantly, the recent financial irregularities I'd been too trusting to question. My first call was to my bank. I need to speak with someone about unauthorized access to my accounts, I told the customer service representative, my voice steadier than it had been in months. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past year, someone with power of attorney, forged power of attorney, I now knew, had been making regular transfers from my retirement account to an account bearing Daniel and Rachel's names. Nearly $50,000 had already been moved, with more transfers scheduled for the coming months. Ma'am, the bank representative said carefully, do you want to file a fraud report? Yes, I replied without hesitation. I want to file a fraud report. My second call was to Claire in California. My youngest daughter answered on the first ring, her voice bright with the sunshine that seemed to follow her everywhere. Mom, what a wonderful surprise. I was just thinking about you. Claire, honey, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to tell you some things that might be hard to hear, but I need you to know the truth about what's been happening here. For the next hour, I laid out everything: the financial manipulation, the forged documents, the conversation I'd overheard, the systematic isolation, and emotional abuse. Claire's responses shifted from disbelief to anger to fierce protectiveness. Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? I've been worried about you being alone there, but Daniel kept saying you were fine, that they were taking good care of you. Because I was ashamed, I admitted. I kept thinking I was imagining things, that I was being too sensitive. What kind of mother accuses her own son of stealing from her? The kind of mother who's being stolen from, Claire said firmly. Mom, I'm booking a flight today. Don't sign anything. Don't give them any money. And whatever you do, don't let them know you're onto them until I get there. My third call was to an attorney. Not one of Daniel's colleagues, but a woman who specialized in elder abuse cases. Her name was Margaret Walsh, and her voice carried the kind of steel I was discovering in myself. Mrs. Morris, she said after I'd outlined my situation, what you're describing is textbook financial elder abuse. The forged power of attorney alone is a felony, but I want you to understand something important. Fighting this will likely destroy your relationship with your son permanently. Miss Walsh, I replied, my relationship with my son was destroyed the moment he decided to steal from me and lie about my mental competency. I'm not fighting to save our relationship. I'm fighting to save my life. The decision wasn't about revenge or even justice, though both of those elements were certainly present. It was about reclaiming my right to exist as a full human being, not as the discarded remnant of someone else's convenience. For 25 years, 25, I had made myself smaller to make others comfortable. I had sacrificed my needs to meet theirs, had swallowed my words to keep peace, had accepted less and less until I was accepting nothing at all. I had become complicit in my own erasure. But sitting there in my kitchen as the morning sun streamed through the windows Robert had installed with such care, I made a choice that felt like coming back to life. I would not disappear quietly into their convenient narrative. I would not fade away to make their lives easier. I was Helen Morris. I had survived the death of my husband, the loss of my family farm, decades of financial struggle, and years of emotional manipulation. I had raised successful children, contributed to my community, and earned my place in this world. If Daniel and Rachel wanted me gone, they were going to have to face the consequences of their choices. And they were going to discover that stealing from an elderly woman and forging legal documents weren't just morally bankrupt. They were serious crimes with serious consequences. The scared, confused woman who had received that Thanksgiving text message was gone. In her place was someone they had never met before. A woman who had finally chosen to fight for her own life. The next 3 weeks moved like a carefully choreographed dance of justice. While Daniel and Rachel continued their charade of concerned family members, I was building a case that would expose their true nature to the world. Margaret Walsh proved to be exactly the advocate I needed. Within days, she had obtained court orders freezing all accounts that had been accessed through the forged power of attorney. The transfer stopped immediately, and Daniel's first indication that something had changed came when his bank called about irregularities in his account activity. "Mom, there seems to be some confusion at the bank," he said, when he called that evening, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "They're asking questions about money transfers from your retirement account. Did you change something with your banking?" "I corrected some unauthorized activity," I replied calmly. "Nothing you need to worry about, dear," or the silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Claire arrived on a Wednesday, her presence in my house like a warm sunrise after months of cold twilight. She took one look at the financial documents spread across my dining room table and hugged me so fiercely I nearly cried. "Mom, I'm so proud of you for fighting back. And I'm so sorry I wasn't here to see what was happening. You're here now, sweetheart. That's what matters." Together, we went through every document, every bank statement, every piece of evidence Margaret Walsh needed to build an airtight case. Claire's background in accounting made her invaluable. She could spot financial irregularities I might have missed and explain complex transactions in terms the legal system would understand. But the most important discovery came when we searched my own files and found the authentic power of attorney documents I'd signed years earlier. Documents that looked nothing like the forgeries Daniel had used. The handwriting analysis alone would be enough to prove fraud. But we also had witnesses who could testify about my mental competency and independence. The restraining order came next. Margaret Walsh had convinced the court that I was in immediate danger of further financial exploitation. And Judge Patricia Coleman agreed. The order prohibited Daniel and Rachel from accessing any of my accounts, entering my property, or contacting me directly, except through legal counsel. Daniel received the papers on a Friday afternoon while he was at work. According to the process server, He turned white as snow and stammered something about family misunderstandings before realizing the gravity of the legal documents in his hands. The criminal complaint was filed the following Monday. Elder, abuse, fraud, forgery, theft, charges that would destroy Daniel's legal career, even if he avoided prison time. Rachel faced her own charges related to conspiracy and money laundering. But the most satisfying moment came when I took back control of my own narrative. For months, Rachel had been spreading whispers about my mental decline, my confusion, my inability to manage my own affairs. Now it was time for the truth. I attended the next community association meeting, the same monthly gathering where Rachel often held court about neighborhood improvements and property values. This time, however, I was the one with something important to say. I wanted to address some rumors that have been circulating about my health and mental capacity. I announced during the open comment period, my voice carrying clearly through the room. Some of you may have heard that I've been confused or unable to manage my affairs. I want you to know that I am mentally sharp, financially independent, and, unfortunately, the victim of elder abuse by my own family members. The room went completely silent. Rachel, who had been sitting in the front row with her usual confident posture, seemed to shrink into her chair. I filed criminal charges against my son and daughter-in-law for forging legal documents and stealing money from my retirement accounts. The case is proceeding through the courts, and I wanted our community to hear the truth directly from me. The whispers started immediately. Rachel tried to leave, but several neighbors approached her with questions she couldn't answer without incriminating herself further. Her carefully constructed image as the perfect wife and community member crumbled in real time. Within days, the story had spread throughout their social circle. Daniel's law firm placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal case. Rachel's real estate clients began canceling contracts, unwilling to do business with someone facing fraud charges. The isolation they had imposed on me was now their own reality. The community that had once admired their success now viewed them with suspicion and disgust. The financial security they had tried to steal from me was evaporating as legal fees mounted, and their professional reputations collapsed. But for me, something beautiful was happening. The neighbors who had watched my exclusion from family gatherings now understood what they had witnessed. The community I had served for decades rallied around me with support, offers of help, and, most importantly, respect for my courage in fighting back. I was no longer the discarded elderly woman tolerated at the edges of my own family. I was Helen Morris, survivor and advocate, a woman who had refused to disappear quietly into someone else's convenient story. 3 months after filing the criminal complaint, I was living a life I hadn't dared imagine possible. The legal proceedings were moving forward steadily. Daniel and Rachel had hired expensive attorneys, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. More importantly, I had reclaimed not just my financial security, but my sense of self-worth. Claire had extended her stay indefinitely, working remotely from my dining room table while helping me rebuild my life. Having her presence in the house reminded me what real family love felt like: unconditional, supportive, and nurturing rather than extractive and manipulative. "Mom, you should see the messages I've been getting," Claire said one morning over coffee. "Friends, colleagues, even people I barely know have been reaching out to tell me how proud they are of you for standing up for yourself." Word of my case had spread beyond our immediate community. Margaret Walsh had connected me with a local organization that supported elder abuse survivors, and they'd asked me to share my story at their monthly support group. What started as a personal fight for justice had become something larger, a voice for other elderly people who were being silenced and exploited by those they trusted most. The first time I spoke to a group of 20 other survivors, I was terrified. But as I told my story and watched heads nodding in recognition and understanding, I realized I had found my purpose for this next chapter of my life. My name is Helen Morris, I began, my voice strong and clear, and I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to fight for your own life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other survivors shared their stories. Adult children stealing Social Security checks, grandchildren manipulating wills, caregivers isolating elderly people from friends and family. The patterns were heartbreakingly similar, but so was the resilience and strength of the people who had found the courage to speak up. I started teaching a weekly class called Financial Self-Defense for Seniors at the community center. We covered everything from recognizing signs of financial abuse to understanding legal documents, to building support networks that couldn't be easily manipulated. The classes filled up immediately, with waiting lists that stretched for months. My relationship with Claire deepened in ways I hadn't expected. She helped me set up a small consulting business, using my decades of library science experience to help other seniors organize and protect their important documents. It wasn't about the money. My retirement savings, now secure from theft, were adequate for my needs. It was about using my skills and experience to serve others, about feeling useful and valued again. The house felt alive in ways it hadn't for years. Friends stopped by regularly. Some were fellow elder abuse survivors. Others were neighbors who had witnessed my journey and admired my courage. My kitchen once again became a gathering place, filled with conversation and laughter and the sounds of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I started dating, something I hadn't done since Robert's death 15 years earlier. Walter Henderson, a retired professor who attended my financial self-defense classes, asked me to dinner one evening after a particularly lively discussion about investment scams. I said yes, surprising myself with how much I was looking forward to the company of a man who saw me as an interesting, attractive woman rather than a burden to be managed. The greatest joy came from unexpected sources. Emma, my granddaughter, had started asking Claire questions about why she couldn't see me anymore. Despite Daniel and Rachel's attempts to control the narrative, children have a way of sensing truth. Claire arranged secret video calls between Emma and me, and I watched my granddaughter's face light up as I told her stories and helped her with homework. "Grandma," Emma said during one of our calls, "Mommy says you're sick, but you don't look sick to me." "I'm not sick, sweetheart," I told her. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that are hard to understand. But I want you to know that Grandma loves you very much, and that will never change." These calls became the highlight of my weeks. Through Claire's careful coordination, I was maintaining a relationship with my granddaughter that Daniel and Rachel couldn't completely sever. Emma was learning that there were multiple sides to every story, and that her grandmother was not the confused, difficult woman her parents had described. Most surprisingly, I found myself feeling grateful for the betrayal that had shattered my old life. The woman who had spent decades making herself smaller to accommodate others had discovered her own strength, The mother who had accepted crumbs of affection while giving her whole heart had learned to value herself appropriately. I was no longer waiting for others to invite me to their table. I had built my own table, and it was surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to be there. The criminal trial concluded on a cold February morning, exactly 1 year after I'd overheard that devastating conversation through my kitchen window. Judge Coleman's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Daniel was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution, while Rachel received 18 months and community service. Both would be registered as convicted felons, their professional licenses revoked permanently. I sat in the courtroom gallery with Claire and Margaret Walsh, watching as the bailiff led my son away in handcuffs. I felt no joy in that moment, only a profound sadness for the man he could have been, and relief that justice had finally been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters from the local news station asked for my comment. I had become something of a local celebrity, the elderly librarian who had taken down her own family's criminal enterprise and inspired dozens of other seniors to speak up about their own abuse. "No family is worth your dignity," I told the cameras, my voice steady and clear. "And no one, no matter how much you love them, has the right to steal your life from you." The interview aired that evening, and by the next morning, I had received calls from senior centers across the state, asking me to speak about elder abuse prevention. My small consulting business had grown into something much larger, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting elderly people from financial exploitation and helping survivors rebuild their lives. But the most meaningful resolution came 6 months later, when Emma turned 10 years old. Claire had maintained legal contact despite Daniel and Rachel's imprisonment, and the courts had granted her temporary guardianship while suitable permanent arrangements were made. Emma would live with Claire in California, but she would spend summers with me in Boston. "Grandma," Emma said during her first visit, as we sat in my garden, planting flowers for the summer, "I'm sorry I believed them when they said you were mean and crazy." "Oh, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her close. "You were just a little girl. You believed what the adults in your life told you. That's not your fault. But I should have known better. You were never mean to me. The important thing is that you know the truth now, and that we have lots of time to make new memories together." We spent that summer building the relationship Daniel and Rachel had tried to destroy. Emma learned to cook my mother's recipes, tend the garden Robert had planted, and understand the strength that comes from standing up for yourself. She also learned that family isn't just about blood relationships. It's about love, respect, and mutual support. Claire decided to relocate her accounting practice to Boston permanently, buying the house next door that Daniel and Rachel had lost to foreclosure. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The space they had used to plot against me was now home to my daughter and granddaughter, filled with the genuine love and laughter they had tried to fake. On Thanksgiving Day, 18 months after receiving that cruel text message, I set my dining room table for 12 people. Claire and Emma, of course, but also Walter and his daughter's family, 3 friends from my support group, Margaret Walsh and her teenage son, and Mrs. Patterson from across the street. As we joined hands for grace, I looked around the table at the faces surrounding me, people who had chosen to be there, who valued my presence and contributions, who saw me as a complete person worthy of love and respect. I'm grateful, I said when it was my turn to share, for the courage to choose my own seat at the table. Emma squeezed my hand. What do you mean, Grandma? I mean that for many years, I let other people decide where I belonged and how much space I was allowed to take up. I waited for invitations that never came and accepted treatment that diminished me. But I learned that we don't have to wait for others to make room for us. Sometimes we have to build our own table. The conversation continued around the table. Stories of challenges overcome, dreams pursued, connections made, and strengthened. This was what family was supposed to feel like: safe, celebratory, mutually supportive. Later that evening, as Claire helped me clear the dishes and Emma played board games with Walter, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately set me free. The family that had rejected me had been replaced by one that celebrated me. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago, scared, diminished, willing to accept any treatment rather than risk losing the people she loved. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more valuable. The empty chair that had once symbolized my exclusion now represented something entirely different: the space I had created for myself in a life of my own choosing, surrounded by people who understood that love without respect isn't love at all. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at home. Looking back now, I realize that my story isn't unique. Across this country, thousands of elderly people are sitting in their own empty chairs, wondering when they became burdens instead of blessings, when their families started seeing them as obstacles rather than treasures. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're being told you're too demanding, too confused, too much trouble, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the problem. You deserve respect, dignity, and a place at the table you helped build. Your children's success doesn't erase your value. Your age doesn't diminish your worth. Your need for love and connection isn't a character flaw that requires management or elimination. Financial abuse against elderly people is one of the fastest growing crimes in America, and it usually comes from family members who count on their victims' love and loyalty to keep them silent. But silence protects the abusers, not the abused. If someone is stealing from you, lying about you, isolating you from friends and family, or making you feel like a burden for needing basic respect and kindness, that's not love. That's abuse. And you have the right to protect yourself, no matter who the abuser is. Document everything. Keep records of your finances, your conversations, your experiences. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Reach out to elder abuse hotlines, legal aid societies, and advocacy organizations. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. To the family members watching this, your elderly relatives are not ATM machines or free labor or convenient scapegoats for your frustrations. They are human beings who deserve the same respect you give to strangers on the street. Their wisdom, experience, and love are gifts, not burdens. And to everyone else, pay attention to the elderly people in your community. If you notice someone being excluded, isolated, or mistreated by their family, speak up. Your voice might be the one that saves them from years of suffering in silence. The empty chair at the table doesn't have to stay empty, but sometimes the person who's been excluded has to build a new table, surrounded by people who understand that everyone deserves a place where they belong. My name is Helen Morris. I survived elder abuse, reclaimed my life, and learned that it's never too late to choose respect over convenience, dignity over false peace. If my story helps even one person find the courage to fight for their own life, then every painful moment of this journey was worth it. Don't let them take your chair, and if they do, build a better table. The choice is yours. The power is yours. The life you save might be your own. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, you are never too old to start over, never too forgotten to matter, and never too powerless to change your story. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us about your own experiences with family dynamics or elder care. And subscribe to this channel if you believe that every person, regardless of age, deserves to live with dignity and respect. Together, we can make sure that no one has to sit in an empty chair again.